designer, when you're innovating, don't develop asshole technology. Don't facilitate assholeness. And it's a crass way of putting it, but I think that's, because it's a very visceral thing. We know when somebody's a jerk. And do we want to make life easier for people to be jerks to us or not? And I don't mean that as a, sarcastic or tongue-in-cheek question. I mean that as a sincere question. Do you want to live in a world where the notion of treating other people well is valued more than money?
This is Mike Stern.
And this is Tom Hershenson.
Welcome to General Magic and the Soul of Tech.
We believed we were building something that would change the world, and in some ways we did. In others, we didn't understand what we were setting in motion. The story of General Magic isn't over. We're still living inside what it started.
Today we have a real treat, something a little bit outside of the box, if you will. The inimitable, extraordinary, and modest, she's probably cringing at me using those first two adjectives, Sarah Kerruish, whose career includes co-directing, I should say, General Magic, the movie. So who better than to turn the tables on us and ask Mike and me questions about our General Magic journey, our view of what's going on in tech today, how tech has lost its way, and how it might reclaim it.
And my favorite thing to do is to ask questions. So thrilled to be here, guys. It's been a while. We've known each other for a long time. So let's do the math. 33 years since we all met at General Magic. And I remember very distinctly then that Mike Stern, the one and only, had sold a book proposal about General Magic to Simon & Schuster?
That was Bantam Doubleday, which is not part of the whole Random House, stack, yeah.
But you had a sense then, this was an amazing company that was a spin out from Apple and was developing what essentially became the iPhone, plus a number of other things, including agents and clouds, which we can get to. But essentially, Mike, you knew then that there was a story to be told. And you pitched that story and it got bought by Random House. The book was never published. So if you can tell us that story, and then why 33 years later, you are in fact writing that book.
The board of directors and Mickey Schulhoff, who was Sony's key liaison with the senior executives at Sony, he was running Sony America, and he was dead set against the idea that there would be a book written about the company. I think he thought it would expose too much about our weaknesses as well as our strengths, and basically killed the project. He got the board to forbid me to do the book. As a lawyer, I had to get a waiver of my confidentiality obligations, and they wouldn't waive, so that was that.
And what was it about the environment and the world that we inhabited then that made you think this is worthy of a book?
Well, again, we were trying to do something unparalleled. It was a moonshot of extraordinary scope and ambition. Mark Perot's vision of anytime, anywhere communication and an ecology built around mobile devices, a network that hosted them and which interoperated across the globe, and which was supported as a standard by all of the major telecommunication and consumer electronic companies in the global economy. No one had conceived of that kind of world system that would enable individuals to carry around a really powerful communicating device that fit in their pocket and let them talk to anyone, anytime, access any information anytime, transact any transaction anytime. We were, and also we would avoid the Sony Betamax VHS problem because we would have a standard and all of the devices would interoperate with each other and all of the networks would be able to talk to each other and connect devices across the globe. So that seemed like one aspect of an incredible story. Then there was the technology challenge. I mean, no one, we had to build it all. None of the components of this ecosystem existed. We had to build the hardware. We had to develop the hardware. We had to create the ecosystem, like an app store, a cloud, a whole set of network protocols that would enable agents to transit these networks and conduct transactions on behalf of users. We had to do all that. This was a kind of a mind-bogglingly ambitious project. And then we brought together, all of the major consumer electronics companies, all of whom were competitors, all the major national telephone companies, in an unprecedented business alliance to create this global standard. Again, part of Mark's vision was not just technology, and was not just handheld mobile communications, but also a business principle, a business structure that would let us vault over Microsoft and other closed proprietary vendors, and maybe displace the desktop.
And
So,
Tom, you were, there's so many stories that one could tell just based on the original story. And of course, Matt and I went on to make the movie with Mike, General Magic, which has the most amazing life. I'm in LA, and I was just at a reading by David Epstein of his new book, Inside the Box, which heavily references General Magic. It's just wild how this story continues to have lives. But Tom, why resurrect the story in book form now? Like, what's relevant to today in the story that we live then?
Well, the short version is that there was a very dark side to what we brought into the universe, and we're on the cusp of another inflection point, and we better get this one right. That's the short version of it. I want to take a step back, though, and elaborate on that. It's difficult, I think, for people who didn't live through those decades to appreciate just how profound the transformation was. At General Magic, we used a metaphor of vehicles, highways, and destinations. Vehicles being the electronic devices that people would use, whether phones or computers or anything else. Highways being the networks that information would travel on, communication signals. And then the destinations, which we can think of today as things like websites, whether those are for information or entertainment or shopping or other kinds of commerce. Today, when people get in their automobiles, they don't give a second thought to their destination. Everybody knows, well, my car can go over any road that is in my town. And if I'm going to go to another town and travel on a highway, I don't have to have special wheels or special engines or anything like that. It's just unremarkable. Well, the world that General Magic was born into was nothing like that. Imagine if before you got in your car, you had to figure out whether the car could go over the roads necessary to get to a destination. And imagine you didn't even have a way of knowing whether that destination was in existence or open or shut, or what it would provide you as a store or a source of entertainment or anything like that. It really is um, difficult to convey just how earth-shattering what General Magic brought into life. AI's capabilities are mind-boggling, and they have tremendous implications, not only for what we can do, but for how we will interact. And I think it's not an understatement to say how we will experience being human. At General Magic, we didn't anticipate the misuse of the technology. We didn't think through how the technology would push human interactions and human relations and society as a whole in a certain direction, because we didn't anticipate certain uses and we didn't pay attention to erecting appropriate guardrails. And the book is written with a sense of urgency that we are on the verge of repeating that same sort of, for lack of a better word, blindness. And I don't want to say a call to arms, maybe a call to conscience for policymakers, technologists, investors, and everyone else to begin focusing on how to humanize technology, how to think through the question of not what do we want out of AI, but what do we want out of our society and culture in the face of this unstoppable impending inflection point.
And the book is called From Jobs to Musk, as I understand it. I'm right. That's right. Yeah. And I think one of the interesting things for me, it was because I had this, I came to the Valley as an outsider, and I have remained an outsider. And I think that's just reinforced by the fact I'm a filmmaker and a storyteller. So I sort of observe things from the outside. And what I observed then was that there seemed to be a confluence of 1960s culture, Steve Jobs. They were all born of that time, which was a time of tremendous optimism, belief in the ability of humanity to transform many of the challenges that we face then, face today. So there was this incredible tech optimism, but also, from my perspective, a naivety. I'm not actually suggesting I was aware of it then. I think it came later. And it certainly wasn't just General Magic, right? But we saw that trend of tech is going to change the world for the better. And as you said, very little regard for the consequences or even thinking through what the scenarios might be. If you were to introduce the ubiquitous 24-hour communication device, what actually those consequences would be. What do you think we learned then that we can apply now in terms of, yes, we need to be very mindful, thoughtful, and aware of the risks that are being posed by AI and, so many different dimensions.
Yeah, I mean, we took it for granted that the impact of our innovation would be benign, socially beneficial, and its value would be equally distributed in the society. Those are the things we took for granted. We didn't question, push back against those assumptions. We took it for granted. It was the water we swim in, and fish don't think about water. They take it for granted. For example, we didn't see the way that we were going to be eliminating gatekeepers in civil society and in social discourse. We were going to disintermediate every gatekeeper by having everyone having a communication device in their pocket with which they could reach everybody else in the world. And it never occurred to us what that disintermediation could result in, which is polarization, isolation, the attenuation or destruction of social relationships, and all the rest of it. Tom, I think it literally never occurred to us that
I
could
think
be.
that's right. I mean, I think we had inklings that had we thought a little bit more instead of being guided by our enthusiasm, we might have started down a chain of questions that would have given us pause. Uh, you know, Innovation is a funny thing, right? Because every innovation begins with an audacious act of imagination. It's something that doesn't exist, and people either can't conceive of it or it seems ridiculous that what the innovation in question is could ever uh, come to life. So you have to be not just guided by optimism, but really fueled by vision. And doubts get in the way of that and are not necessarily pushed aside, but at a minimum set aside. I remember Mark at a lecture, Mark Peratt, one of the three co-founders of General Magic, at a lecture at Stanford, talking about when the marginal cost of information goes to zero. And looking back, I thought that's such a important point of departure for exploring the potential consequences of what we were building, right? Because if all information is within reach, if there are no gatekeepers, if there are no people curating that information in a sensible way, two things. First of all, everything becomes on a playing field, and separating fact from fiction becomes, uh, let's just put it modestly, challenging. The second thing is, if you can't make money off of producing information, then, as we all know, we become the product. Our eyeballs are what are sold. And Mike, you're absolutely right. We didn't take a moment to consider the inevitable effects of what we were ushering into the world. And I think anybody watching this or listening to this, how many times have you been interrupted by a work email after hours? How many times have you engaged in doom scrolling or gone down internet rabbit hole? How many times have you been dispirited at the polarization and extremism in our politics? These are all things that flow, I would argue, directly from what we were engaged in at General Magic. And I don't think there are many people listening to this or watching this who haven't experienced those and other kinds of ill effects of, again, what we ushered in.
And why Jobs and why Musk? Why have you chosen those two characters in this era that we've lived in to represent the idealist and the...
I mean, for all his flaws, and many people would say that Steve was an asshole. For all of his flaws, he had a humane and humanistic approach to technology. To him, what he was trying to build and to get people to use were the product of craft and artisanal sensibility. They were beautiful, sensual, easy to use, and enhanced, enabled, furthered human creativity. That's what he was really focused on. Less focused on how to make the minimum viable product that would make the most money the fastest. That's not the way he thought. The whole culture of Apple was to bring something aesthetically beautiful and functionally useful into the world and make people's lives better, give them tools to enhance their creativity, to discover the aspects of their own personality, to be in touch with others.
Though it wasn't just him, right? It came out of this movement. And
Well,
is it Fred that's written extensively about this, and John Markoff?
yeah, I mean, Fred Turner's book on the new left's morphing into the inaugural culture of Silicon Valley, I think is dead on. These were humanistic values, and they were anti-authoritarian. They were anti-corporate culture. Somewhat egalitarian. Uh, certainly cared about equality and distribution. Right? Yeah. How to socialize the benefits of innovation rather than privatize them. That was so fundamental to that vision. Musk is a greedy, malignant narcissist who cares about power and wealth to the exclusion of anything else. He's a brilliant, he got to give him credit for being a brilliant innovator and engineer, but he is a malevolent, malignant narcissist.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people, a lot of characters in this story that we've lived that, look like they might be good guys at the beginning, and then they turn to the dark side. So why Musk particularly? Why not Zuckerberg? Why not, any number of characters who seem to sell their soul to the devil?
I want to be clear, Musk is a case study, but also an avatar, right? So there are an array of individuals that you can point to. And I think the fundamental question is, what will you not do for money? Right? Now, for Jobs, it wasn't about the bottom line per se. That wasn't irrelevant. But I've heard stories about, and people know about, products that would be developed within Apple, and Steve would refuse to go forward with them. That there was an ethos that he had fidelity to that wasn't purely about maximizing shareholder value or his own personal wealth. And so we see again and again over the last several decades a shift towards a perspective and an ethos around technology that is wedded to wealth and making money and nothing else. And so Musk is representative of that. Uh, his remarks about empathy is the enemy, and I'm paraphrasing, is telling. Now, let's have a real debate about that notion and the implications of that ethos for not just how technology is designed, but how technology will rule over us. So again, Jobs is no angel, but he was guided by a set of principles that I think there's widespread agreement resulted in technology products that benefited people, that were not tools of oppression or tools of dehumanization. And Musk seems devoid of the same sort of guiding principles that humanized the technology that people like Steve Jobs, and there are others we can name as well, uh, who were ascended in Silicon Valley, a generation or two generations ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's classic. I mean, uh, Musk's willingness to do Doge, right? Apple didn't have lobbyists for its first 20 years, right? I mean, the early Valley startups didn't seek political power. They sought to stay as far away from government as they could. They were anti-regulation in a lot of ways, but they didn't seek legislative capture. They didn't buy politicians. They didn't buy elections. We're using Musk as an example because of Doge and the intersection of the tech oligarchy and their Gilded Age values with their impact on every other person's life in this country. To destroy the safety net, to pervert healthcare, to undermine education, to undermine democracy. They have avidly sought to impose those values on the rest of us. And, what he did with Grok compared to the way Steve would develop a product. When Grok's uptake faltered, what did they do? They retrained it so it could create sexualized images of pubescent girls and create AI versions of their photographs where they were nude. That's what he did consciously in order to goose the adoption of Grok.
So we're
compare that to the product philosophy at Apple or General Magic.
Yeah. So we're in the era of AI. It's here, it's happening, it's everywhere. What lessons do you bring back from, the TARDIS, from Doctor Who's TARDIS in 1993? What are the key things we need to be really aware of?
I think that the first and foremost is to understand that every technology has a cultural and sociological impact. Mike has heard me say this 1,000 times. It's not an original thought. It's borrowed from Jerry Mander in his book in, I think it was late 70s, 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television. And Mander points out early on in the book that there's no such thing as a softer, gentler gun. A gun is a tool for destroying things. And if you pick up a gun, it influences you to start thinking about the world in terms of things to destroy. Now, that's not an argument against guns. It's true with any tool. If you pick up a hammer, the world becomes a matter of looking around for things to hammer on. And if you're building houses, that's a great tool. If you're attacking people, not so good. So the first question we have to ask, I think, is what is AI in terms of not what it does, but how it subtly and without us knowing at the time necessarily, how does it change the way we think, we relate, what we think is important, what we think doesn't matter? So we have to think through what this tool does to the way we perceive and experience life. That's the fundamental question. Now, that sounds very left coast, admittedly, and the challenge is how do you operationalize it? And without getting into the weeds of that, I think the first order thing to recognize is that's the question to ask. And again, the experience with Grok is telling in that presumably there was no one who said, wait a second, what is this technology driving? What kind of behavior is it facilitating? And remember, what you permit, you promote. So the first order question around artificial intelligence is not about what it can do, but what will it do to us? That's where the inquiry has to begin, I think, is the cornerstone of the discussion. Now, Mike, feel free to shoot down everything I've just said.
No, absolutely. I mean, all technologies have path dependencies, things that they constrain, things that they enable. And there are architectural choices one can make in conceiving of a product or a technology or a system, which constrain, what are the things to constrain? What are the things to enable? Those architectural choices need to be made now in terms of AI. When General Magic built the first agent-based system, the Telescript system, back in the 90s, Rich Miller and Jim White, their first fundamental approach to the architecture was, how do we make this safe? That was their primary goal. It was to accomplish agent interactions on behalf of users, which would be autonomous, but in ways that could not go rogue and couldn't be used by rogue actors to do destructive things. And they built deterministic safeguards into the structure of Telescript that would basically prevent agents from doing things they weren't supposed to, doing things that the consensus would be socially inappropriate or socially damaging. And that was not how the folks who have been developing AI over the last 10 years have been thinking. They're not thinking about deterministic safety. They're thinking about how can we do more with models that are not constrained.
They're hiring philosophers. If that's any word of encouragement. I just heard that DeepMind's hired a philosopher. I know that OpenAI, I know that Anthropic, I'm sure the other companies too, they have in-house ethics philosophers
Mm.
who are working on these problems. But I just want to take a step back and make sure that everybody understood what Mike said there, because basically, if I understand it correctly, General Magic didn't just play a major role in bringing the smartphone to life and into our pockets, but they also invented agents. Now that's crazy when you think about AI now and the role of agents today. So can you just go back? Maybe Tom, you can tell us a little bit about, like, it's just so wild that this company that's spun out so many ideas also spun out the idea of agent. I think, right? Was it a novel idea at General Magic?
Well, Mike, you know about the patent more than I do. It certainly was in the
Yeah,
cutting edge. I
we
don't.
we got one of the most fundamental patents in the space. It's
So
still cited.
can
It's
we
still
say that
cited.
General Magic invented agents? Is that a fair claim?
Yeah, I mean, it's still cited today. It's one of the,
Crazy.
it's one of the most cited patents
It's so crazy.
ever. So yeah, it was a relatively new idea. I mean, people have been talking about expert systems and stuff like that, but not about agents, not about autonomous agents that could traverse a network, move from device to device, place to place, and do things. No one had been talking about that.
The analogy that I've heard before is, imagine you want to have a delicious slice of homemade cake and you have someone to help you, as opposed to you having to go out and get all the ingredients yourself. But more than just that, it's not just a helper. And you can imagine that you could call up if you're away from your kitchen, you could call up your kitchen and guide someone there step by step what to do. Open the drawer, take out the mixer, open the cupboard, get out the flour, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you would have to communicate with that entity every single step of the way. And that's how computers and remote computing initially worked. There was what was called remote procedure call, where one computer over a communications line would send an instruction to another computer remotely and then wait for a response, and so on and so on and so on. And it was laborious, as this retelling of it is boring. But imagine if, just like you could send somebody to a remote kitchen armed with a list of ingredients and a list of instructions, and you wouldn't have to call them at all. They just go there and bake the cake and bring it back to you, right? And so that's really what the model of agents was, that you would have little pieces of software that could travel through the network and then autonomously do all sorts of things, travel from one computer to another computer, et cetera, performing activities on your behalf. And you can see immediately the safety and security concerns that are around that. And that was at the core of the design work that Jim Miller, I'm sorry,
Jim White.
Jim White and Rich Miller did with respect to Telescript. So uh, there, I think on the Telescript side of the story, which is not as well known as the device side of the story, that really was at the forefront of their thinking. And I see scant evidence at most that that's at the forefront of the thinking of leaders in the AI space. Sarah, you said that an AI company, has hired a philosopher. Well, to quote Hans Saft, who was a executive at an analog semiconductor company way back then, who can he fire? It's one thing to hire
Yeah.
people to sound the alarm about ethical or moral concerns, but if they don't have real power within that organization, then they don't have any ability to erect safeguards, enforce boundaries, and make sure that people do the right thing for the right reasons.
So how do
Yeah, I
we
mean, after Watergate, we had Gates, right? We had every scandal was something Gate. Well, now we have washing, and then you can put the adjective in front of washing. We have sane washing, we have greenwashing. Well, we're getting safety washing now. Anthropic's, OpenAI's constitutions for it. It's all bullshit. And, their actions speak louder than words, except for Anthropic's. They're all of them, without except Anthropic being the only exception, have signed contracts with the Pentagon to let the Pentagon do anything they want with their tools.
but I think one of the fundamental problems is that we live in a capitalist country age, most of us who are not in China or in Russia, but um, I think that, the incentives are just not there, are they? The economic incentives aren't there for people to do the right thing. So it's all very well to have some well-intentioned people. It's all very well to have people who say they're going to do the right thing. But, to your point earlier, when the stock price goes down, then they make a different decision. And that seems to be the driver.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I want to push back gently against the hypothesis that we live in a capitalist society. People vote against their economic interests all the time in the United States. So there has to be something going on other than pure uh, economic interest as the motivator, right? So we have that as a model, number one. Number two is a vexing question of how do you mobilize popular support for pushing back against it's all about share price in the next quarter. Now, we do have things like socially responsible investing. And although the letters D and E and I have been discredited in many circles these days, no one contests that a workplace should be fair and that its personnel should be complete and that should be a welcoming place to work. So there are values that supersede or at least are championed on a par with just making money. The question is how to leverage the ethical moral beliefs that people have now and demonstrate to them that those are relevant to what's going on with this inflection point we're seeing and again, not just in technology, but in our culture.
And we're seeing it. We're seeing it across the Midwest, where uh, counties that Trump carried by 17 or 20 points are unified in resisting data center construction, for example. Because of the way it misallocates resources, misallocates water, misallocates electricity, misallocates capital. These are MAGA heartland places where they've called city councils that have done deals to build data centers and things like that. There is a way of bridging some of our right and left disagreements over the humane beneficial use of technology. And we're seeing that starting to erupt in the pushback against AI's being, the major capital sink in the economy. And it's uh, exacerbating the inequality of the distribution of resources in our society. So, there's hope in all sorts of spaces about methods to push back, both organizing at the grassroots level and trying to do something at the policy level for state, it's at the state and local as well as federal levels. So we're not despairing about the ability to push back, uh, but ultimately it's got to be about reawakening people's faith that technological change is not going to wreck their lives. What happened, the deindustrialization of the Midwest, right? The concentration of the farm economy, and the not destruction, but thinning out of the family farm ethos and ability to resist the four major food conglomerates in this country. I mean, how do we, how to revive that sense of potential, that sense that people can be empowered to make their lives better, and that they can use tools of will to do that. That's the political problem we face. But
What are you optimistic about? Like what, well, first of all, what do you use AI for? Tell me about your daily AI habits.
don't use it.
You don't use it at all.
Well, I'm afraid it'll attenuate my ability to think and write.
So you don't use it for research, citations, proof
I
like
do use it for certain kinds of research. Like, if I want to find out, what some obscure company had in their annual report in 1980, yeah, I use it for that.
You don't use it for travel planning, plan 3 perfect days for me in Italy? No. It's pretty good at that. Tom, how do you use it?
I use it in two ways. First of all, not in a deep way, but on search engines, There will be topics that I just want to very quickly get a one sentence overview. There was a company today that I was unfamiliar with it. And I asked Copilot just to give me a one sentence statement of what that company does. Uh, A little bit faster, a little bit more efficient than using a search engine. I have used AI to summarize extremely long transcripts so that it would, on an automated basis, just take out the ums and ahs and other kind of tangential remarks that are in a long transcript. But I've played around with it some for what most of my work involves, which is writing and editing. And it's good in some use cases, but I'm not blown away by it. So, and I agree with Mike. It's not that I'm skeptical of its ability to do decent work. It's that I think that there's something lost in using it, that you don't necessarily think through writing and think through what you're trying to convey in a piece of writing when you just rely on AI.
Wasn't there an MIT
But
study about that recently that showed your brain basically atrophies if you use ChatGPT?
but you've pioneered one of the great and most beneficial use, Sarah, beneficial uses of AI. Where in the medical space, there are all sorts of really important and great things happening. But using AI to analyze imagery,
Yeah.
mammograms and other kinds of
Yeah.
images. I mean is having a huge and beneficial impact.
I think
It's
it's
not
going
replacing
to
radiologists.
I think it's going to revolutionize medicine. I was going to say, I mean, its ability to synthesize data, disparate data sources, and make sense of it. My brother's a doctor, and he just gave one of, I don't know which tool he was using, but he gave some blood results to, let's say, Claude, and to 8 medical students. And those medical students, 2 of them got it right after quite a long period of time. The rest of them got the analysis wrong, but the AI model got it right in seconds. I use it for that. I upload all of my medical data, and its analysis of my bog standard blood results are so much more interesting and insightful than anything I've ever gotten from a doctor. Not to say doctors obviously have a really important role to play. I don't think AI will replace doctors, but I just think its ability to, in terms of identifying drug targets,
Yeah,
in
I mean,
cancer, predicting which drugs will work best for certain kinds of cancers, it's gonna have a profound impact. And I think we'll see medical advances in the next 5-10 years accelerated at a pace never before seen.
yeah, I completely agree. The Gladstone Institute is doing stuff, building their own models with good data. Not scraping the internet. They're using validated genomic data.
Yeah,
They're able for diseases that have monocausal genetic etiologies. There aren't many, but most are multivariate. But for the ones that are monocausal, they've identified genes. They're spinning out companies to create targeted therapies, which are effective. They're in stage 3 clinical trials. That's something that could never have happened at all, or at the speed that has happened without CRISPR and AI. And so we're not Luddites. I mean, we're not saying this technology is evil or it needs to be suppressed.
guardrails.
We're saying it needs to be architected up front in a way that avoids some of the baneful effects we saw the last time around.
Who would
Yeah,
be?
I'm.
Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, as Mike knows, I think in song lyrics, and there's a great song by the Pretenders, "My City Was Gone," and it's about returning to Ohio, where coincidentally Mike Stern grew up, and how urbanization and everything else had sullied all the places of fond memory of the singer. And there's a line in there about my pretty countryside had been paved down the middle by a government that had no pride. And to me, what that encapsulates is the idea that we get to decide what matters to us. I mean, are you willing to pay a tiny bit more for milk at the supermarket because family owned dairies can exist with those price controls? Uh, you know, it's on the one hand, no one enjoys inefficiency. But on the other hand, there are social goods and cultural goods that come from eschewing the money over everything ethos. So, you know, it's a it's a question of decisions we make collectively and values that we hold. I know I'm repeating
My, bi-
myself to an extent, but I
my
think it
biggest
bears
concern,
repeating.
I think, by the way, I buy my milk in bottles from a dairy in Normandy. I live in Paris. So yeah, I'm all about like getting your milk from local farmers. My
Now,
biggest
let me just unpack that for 1 second. I'm curious. What does it mean to you to do that? Is there an emotional experience you have when you get that bottle or pour milk from it? Does it have
it's a
meaning for you, or is it just, "This is where I get my milk"?
Yeah, when I was a kid, we used to get milk bottles delivered to the doorstep, and I knew the farmers. I basically knew the cows, although I didn't know their names. Um, and I know it's whole organic milk, and I'm privileged to be able to afford that whole organic milk. And so, yeah, I would rather buy that than some, mass-produced milk in a plastic container.
Right, and your ability to do that reflects certain decisions that have been made within a polity.
But ones of economic privilege, right? And I think that's where, for me, my biggest concern. We've seen I think, the erosion of democracy, of course, but and that is profoundly troubling. But actually, the thing that worries me most is the economic divide that we're seeing, the haves and have-nots, and that divide is getting wider. Technology, I think, is the enabler, and I think that is the single biggest danger we face. That it will accelerate that division between, the people who can afford to buy milk in a bottle and people who can't afford to put food on the table for kids.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, all
I
of the investment in AI right now, the benefits are going to a very small group of
Yeah,
oligarchs and their employees.
yeah.
The private sales from Anthropic and OpenAI in anticipation of their public offerings later this year, the private sales they let their companies conduct have injected $30 billion in cash into the Bay Area economy. There are 70 employees at those two companies who now got at least $30 million each um, in when they were able to exercise their options and then sell them to private equity. Um, that all of the benefits are accruing more and more in the K-shaped economy. To the 1%. There are ways to deal with that. Lots of ways to deal with that. Um,
Well, tell us, what do we do?
a government there are ways of redistribution up front, and there are ways of distribution on the back, redistribution on the back end, taxes.
but
Um,
no, Mike, I would take a step back because I think
Mhm.
before we get to solutions, it's what's the problem we're trying to solve, you know? Um, Last I heard, I
Concentration
may
of
be
wealth
misinformed,
and
but last I heard, things like having fire departments and having schools and having shop owners mattered in a city, right? Where are those people living? If you are priced out of San Francisco as a school teacher or a cop or a firefighter or a letter carrier, what then? Right. And once we start seeing the value of certain things, then we have to work our way backwards and, reconcile our desire to have those things as part of our civic fabric to the distortions that um, arise when suddenly 70 people can outbid any human being on the earth for whatever house they like in San Francisco. So I begin not with, well, is it a matter of on the front end or on the back end, but what's the problem we're trying to solve? And then going from there to solutions that do that. I am old enough to remember somebody who was old enough to remember when under Eisenhower, the marginal tax rate for the highest earners, I believe, was 90%. That's a non starter today. But back then, it was accepted. There was a sense of, you didn't get to that stratosphere solely by the sweat of your brow. And there is something good for society when we set certain limits on income and wealth. Today, you'd be crucified, I think, if you advance that, trying to be a mainstream candidate in the United States.
yeah. Well, Mandami's going to try, right?
right. So rehabilitating human-centered technology design and architecture, one also has to rehabilitate the notion of the public good. and what it means to create public goods and to deal with the free rider problem and and all the classic economic issues that arise around the creation of public goods. But there are innovation can create public goods or it can destroy them. Right now, it's generally destroying them. It's increasingly privatizing the benefits of technology. It's undermining education, and it's certainly undermining democracy. That's not inevitable. There's nothing inevitable about that, and it can be reversed.
So
And
what's it
so
going to
that's one of the things we want to talk about
so
in the
what's it
book.
going to take? Is it going to be, is it a different kind of leadership? Are people really having those conversations? It feels like
Well,
an
think
increasing minority of people are having those conversations.
you've got to take the various emancipation movements from the 50s through the 90s. Look at the evolution of the civil rights movement. Look at the anti-war movement. Look at feminism. Look at gay rights. I mean, how did the changes in society come about? How did we get the Voting Rights Act? How did we,
Well,
how
I'll
did
give you
we
another one, Mike.
build a
Take
safety?
The Americans with Disabilities Act,
Right.
which was a
You need
landmark piece of legislation. And that, business at the time railed against it, and we're going to have to do X, Y, and Z. And today, I think there's broad acceptance in society that these so-called disabilities don't diminish someone's humanness, and it doesn't diminish their right, to participate fully in our economy and our society.
So who are
So
the
it's not
cultural
just
leaders? Yeah,
say
I
that again.
agree. Who are the cultural leaders then? Who are those people? You know, Martin Luther King, and who are those leaders? I don't see them.
Yeah, it takes leaders in the streets, and it takes leaders in the legislatures, and it takes leaders in the agencies. And
Are you seeing
we've
them, Mike? Are you seeing
well,
those?
no, but there have been points in the past, like in the 60s, where those three things converged, and they were all Martin Luther King was in the streets, Lyndon Johnson was in the White House, uh, John Doerr was in the Justice Department. Uh, it, these things converged. It can't happen again. We have to make it happen again.
Sarah,
Uh, uh,
the blunt answer to your question is no, we're not seeing those people yet. And I think that part of the reason is, and this goes back to the impetus for the book, is Mike and I and our other co-author, Tamara Helm, uh, are trying to sound the alarm that the issues aren't being thought through at this point. That it's really just a matter of an awakening consciousness about the design ethos and the ethical and moral ethos around technology in the face of this, uh, tremendously powerful, revolutionary um, technology. I mean, when looms were invented and the steam engine was invented, you didn't have union organizers, the next day. It takes a while for these things to dawn on people. And I think that the effort of the book is to try to accelerate the emergence of a consciousness that then brings forth leaders in the realms that Mike just described.
So, I mean, Tom, I know you as one of the most funny people on earth. Nobody can make me laugh like you. So, have you got a funny story for us in the book? Or
Uh,
come on, you gotta have
I
one.
can't. I'm sorry, I can't help but recall the famous scene in the movie Goodfellas, where Joe Pesci's character, when told he is funny, menacingly replies, "Funny how?" I think that there were. I mean, to me, the funny stories about General Magic are ones that involved playfulness and pranks and things like that.
Rabbits, broken windows,
Uh, exactly. Hijinks.
impersonating the employees of Philips, was it? No,
Sure,
Sun.
or pretending
Sun
to be a.
Microsystems. When you and
That
Steve
was my infamous call to Microsoft tech support, pretending to be someone confused elderly man who didn't know what an operating system was, um, which resulted ultimately in the Microsoft technical support person uh, understanding that while I was comparing Microsoft to Nazis, I was comparing them to the good Nazis. So that kind of absurdity. Um,
Well, you and
There are
Steve,
fun stories, and I
you and
think
Steve impersonating Sun employees
well,
and
that's right.
winning
We
their
entered the
contest.
Sun employee
Singing.
karaoke contest and won.
Yeah,
Steve,
and you
it
won.
was
You guys
it was
won.
Tom and Steve.
Yes,
Yes, yes,
love
and they
music.
won the contest.
It's a beautiful duet.
Yeah.
Anyways, I digress. I mean, I think that the fun stories about General Magic speak to the soul of General Magic. It was a place where there was playfulness and joy. And I've never been inside a Tesla factory, but my impression of tech today is that there isn't any lightheartedness. There isn't any of that spirit. And it's not frivolity. It's inherent. It's at the core. It's fun is somehow meant as something unadult, non-serious, and immature, and that's not true. Anybody who's worked for a boss who's a jerk and worked for a boss who's a saint has a preference between those two. And I've done harder work for people who were wonderful people than I did working for people who were, really horrible individuals. And we all know that. When Google used to have that line about "Don't be evil." Part of what's missing from our society, I think, people can challenge me on this, on the left and the right and the center as well, is the idea of, you know what, first things first, don't be an asshole, right? And when you're a technology designer, when you're innovating, don't develop asshole technology. Don't facilitate assholeness. And it's a crass way of putting it, but I think that's, because it's a very visceral thing. We know when somebody's a jerk. And do we want to make life easier for people to be jerks to us or not? And I don't mean that as a sarcastic or tongue-in-cheek question. I mean that as a sincere question. Do you want to live in a world where uh, the notion of treating other people well is valued more than money? It's kind of that simple to a certain degree.
One interesting thing, I think, the book is in development. Um, but if people are interested in participating in this conversation, reading more about this, you guys have a Substack. And there's some really interesting pieces coming out there. I love the one about agents. It's a great repository of thoughtful commentary around some of the subjects that we've been talking about, and a place for people to give their opinions. So I mean, same here. People, we want people to participate. This isn't just us pontificating about things. It's really about trying to open up a conversation with people.
I think
So
that's I'm sorry to interrupt, Sarah.
no,
I
just so if people do have comments, if they're listening now, we want to hear from you. What are your
yeah,
thoughts? What are the
uh,
guardrails? What are you optimistic about? What are you pessimistic about?
well, I'm not pessimistic about someone writing to the. I mean, I'm not optimistic about. Let me try that again. I am not optimistic about a single individual riding to our rescue. Uh,
You
Steve,
think no one's going to make a comment?
no, I
That's
think
death.
that
That's
we.
internet death, Tom. If nobody writes,
No. What I mean is, I don't think that there'll be a figure who arrives on the scene who will wave a Steve Jobs like magic wand and make everything all right. I mean, part of the approach of the book is that we are interviewing people who collectively have centuries, and I mean that, centuries of experience innovating and observing the trajectory of technology development, because uh, we don't know what the solutions are. I think that what Mike and I and Tamara are intending to do is try to provoke some conversations and ask some questions that might be in some way, shape, or form semi-wise. So the answer is across all sorts of individuals. And just as with innovation, you have to think broadly. And it's not about pedigree or credentials. It's about the strength of an idea. That's exactly part of what we're after. So for people to comment, people to connect with us via the Substack or any other way, I actually, believe it or not, still believe in something called handwritten letters. We're eager to get people's view. I think one of the morals of the story about General Magic is how we didn't know what we didn't know. And the only antidote to that is casting a wide net and being receptive to all sorts of thoughts and ideas from all sorts of people all over the place.
That makes me think of Megan Smith, who was a general magician, went on to be Chief Technology Officer of the United States of America under President Obama. And she always asks the question, who have you got at the table? Do you have all the voices at the table? And I guess I throw that challenge out to you guys, and to Tamara. How are you making sure that you have everyone at the table? So we're not just talking to, the usual suspects, but Native American communities. I know Megan, for example, works a lot with Native American communities. And, um, there's all kinds of communities that are not necessarily participating or consulted about tech in the way that perhaps we do. Although I don't want to make that assumption really, but I think so what the question is how are you making sure that you have, in the words of Megan Smith, all the right people at the table?
Yeah, there's nothing like two old white guys talking about stuff. And I bore myself enough. So, me boring other people is not pushing things forward. There's been an intentional effort to diversify the set of people that we're interviewing for the podcast. But
And the
I,
book, presumably too, right?
right, which will feed
Yeah.
into the right,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. But the point is well taken, and we haven't operationalized it, to be blunt about it. We have more work to do in terms of casting as wide a net as possible. We're constrained to a certain extent by the people we know. That's why one of the upsides of the internet, for anybody to get in touch with us. Again, just as we didn't know what we didn't know at General Magic, there are tons of voices that we haven't heard yet that we don't know exist. So that's
Well,
part of the challenge.
by the way, I wasn't being accusatory at all. I'm just curious. I'm just thinking about,
No,
I
it's a
know,
fair accusation. That's all I'm
well, it's not
saying.
an accusation. I mean, I think, I think about Megan had the most interesting experiences working with a Native American group. I can't remember which tribe it was, but they had a whole sort of engagement around time travel. Like they, in the words of Megan, they time travel. They have an understanding of how physics works that we don't have, and I just think that could be such an interesting. How are those communities thinking about AI?
Yeah,
I
there's
just
a
think I just love to hear what they're thinking.
and Jerry Mander, the author I mentioned earlier, has another book called In the Absence of the Sacred, and he outlines in it a First Peoples methodology of thinking through multiple generations forward the impact of a decision. That
Yeah, I
the
mean,
central component of the decision-making methodology is future effects. Not next year, not next decade, but for centuries after you're dead, what will the effects be?
and
So that's
Chinese government too. Chinese, right? That's very cultural, thinking of generations ahead. Be interesting to think about. Have you done any research about how the Chinese government is thinking about this, or the Chinese population, or other countries that have a different perspective on time and generational achievement?
I will
Yeah, I mean,
let my
the Chinese are certainly know how to play a long game. I mean, the last 400 years are a blip. They're an interregnum. China was the center of the universe for 3,000 years. The rise of Europe is, as I say, is an anomaly. It's a blip. It's already eroding. The domination of Europe and its colonies, Australia, you know, Canada. I mean, our brief moment in the sun is fading. So they think differently about what kind of effort needs to be applied to achieve what kind of results, and they're not short-term thinkers. And that's their greatest strength. It's also their greatest weakness. Europe and North America are much more nimble and have been in the past up until now more innovative. So, why did the Industrial Revolution happen in England and not in China? Right, so it does cut in both ways. The other perspectives we're getting, Steve Jarrett, your husband, was talking about how do you bring AI to people whose dialects are not
Yeah,
are not English? I mean,
yeah,
in all of Africa, where much of Orange's customer base is, there are hundreds, literally hundreds of dialects.
yeah.
Um, how do you and AI is English right now? It's all English.
Steve is
What do
super passionate about that.
how
Super
do you
exciting.
how do you create access to the tools, just the telephony itself, right? For people who don't speak English or French. Mark Peratt at one of our uh, Q&As a couple of months ago was talking about how, there needed to be sovereign AIs, which, if you're in Mexico and you're talking to ChatGPT and you ask it about 1848, it's not going to tell you anything that's true to your experience as a
Yeah.
Mexican, right?
Yeah. No, I agree.
Well, it can't,
Yeah.
because it doesn't know you. It can't know you. It can't know you, the kind of Spanish you speak, and it doesn't know any of the historical or social context. How to build AIs that will be congruent with national cultures that are not Anglophile, right? All those things have to happen, and we're looking at. We don't know how to make it happen exactly, but people are thinking about it.
What is the thing that if you could wave the magic AI wand, what would you fix in society?
uh, Healthcare to start with.
Hmm. Well, I think that's a very real likelihood. Tom?
Um,
Helping me get more sleep, number one. Number two, I'll give a
I can help you with that.
serious answer. I think
Yeah, you have
healthcare.
to get daylight. You get outside in the morning, you get daylight, you take magnesium. Are you doing all of
See,
that?
see, I have my personal agent here in the interview. What need do I have for AI? I think that two things come to mind. Number one, the climate crisis.
Yeah.
Now, the
Yeah.
amount of power AI takes and its carbon footprint are at cross purposes with that. But that seems to me to be a species-wide catastrophe on the verge of coming to fruition. So that's number one. Number two, I'm a big believer in quality of access to education. To me, it's just mind-boggling the wasted human resource we have in kids that don't have access to phenomenal education from the earliest moments of their lives. So I don't think that AI is a substitute for teachers, but that to me is a huge societal problem that AI could contribute to solving. What worries me most is AI's militarization. And we've seen this before, and we negotiated up till now rather successfully the advent of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. And make no mistake about it, AI has the potential to be another type of weapon of mass destruction. And having international regimes and treaties and other mechanisms to control that, to limit the worst case possibilities, is crucial. And I
Trying
don't
to
see
end
it.
on a high note here, Tom, not the mass destruction of civilization.
Well, the Clash, for those of us who are old enough to remember the Clash, um, I think on Combat Rock, that album, there was a little rectangle that said, "The future is unwritten." And I it's that old line of I have to believe in free will. I have no choice. In the same way, I have to be an optimist about it. Otherwise, what's the point? It's not too late. AI is a wonderful tool. It's done and is doing and will do wonderful things. And let's keep that going. But let's also ask the hard questions that as yet have not been said loud enough and haven't been answered adequately. I think that's where
And final words from you, Mike?
yeah, I don't despair. I just get angry, and we need a lot of angry people in the streets, and we need a lot of pressure on the current set of elites to move them back in the direction of understanding politics as a delivery system that benefits most, not a few. And that can be done. And um, AI is an example of when American, I grew up in what's now the Rust Belt. When American car companies and other manufacturers began to offshore in the 70s, late 70s and early 80s. Um, it was seen as a good thing, because it created efficiency, it improved their margins, uh, gave greater returns to shareholders. The fact that steel workers lost their jobs, that auto workers lost their jobs, that whole towns died, um, was not was people saw it as collateral damage, and there was no systematic approach to dealing with the social disruption, the loss of the dignity of work, and all the rest that caused. It could have happened. The New Deal did part of that quite successfully during an earlier period when people were bereft of work and uh, you know uh, the private sector wasn't going to be able to fix it. Why are we willing to just sit back and let there be a white collar rust belt? Why are we willing to accept that is inevitable? Um, the current our current politics are about destroying the safety net, but that doesn't have to stay that way. And building uh, alternatives for people who are going to be displaced by AI to avoid the dystopia that could result in a rust belt and a white collar rust belt. We know how to do it. It's been done before. It takes money and political will, and it takes redistribution of money. It takes changes in the tax system. Blah blah blah. But all these things can be done.
Yeah, and have been done.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is not anybody's first rodeo in terms of dealing with new risks, in terms of creating ways to cushion the blow of changes that are inevitable, et cetera. So that part of the good news is we have models of how to do this, and it's been done before.
Yeah, I
So
mean, cars weren't.
Mike
Yeah,
said, don't despair, get angry.
yeah, cars weren't safe, right? And tort law took care of it. Oh, it took 60 years, but tort law, creating the rules for liability for design defects and for failure to, for failure to design safe, to make safety the linchpin of design. Well, it took 2 generations. Took lots of lawsuits. I mean, it was a terribly inefficient, heartbreaking process. But we've got safe cars now.
Yeah. And you
It-
can take Waymos.
And what we can learn from that is how to short circuit that process and make it faster, less heartbreaking, and more effective.
Well, I'm glad you're writing the book. The conversation is ongoing. If anybody has comments, please comment below. And just send Tom a letter. He particularly appreciates handwritten letters, as he has stated.
You can write it, take a photo of it, and email it.
Okay. All right. But thank you, guys. That was very interesting. I learned a lot and a lot to think about. And what can I say except I cannot wait to read the book.
Well, Sarah, it's always a delight to interact with you. Just your intelligence, your inquisitiveness, your sense of humor. I know I'm embarrassing you, but as I was once told, only flatter people about the truth. All of that is so true about you. So great to see you, and just what an enjoyable time to spend with you.
And Sarah, above all, you saw the General Magic story as a human story about people struggling with failure and its consequences, and what that character forming crucible led them to do. You saw that, the hero's journey as the core of the General Magic story, as much as developing new technology. And we need to find those kinds of stories now.
And those heroines and heroes are out there. I just met this guy today who's developed a new treatment for Alzheimer's. It's unbelievable, the results that he's having. And I guess fundamentally I'm an optimist. I believe we'll figure it out. So I'm going with that.
So you're going to tell those stories, and we're going to make people see the possibilities for beneficial change.
Yeah, we need an institute. We need a General Magic Soul of Tech Institute. Like the CRISPR Institute at Esplanaar that came together when CRISPR was invented. We need something like that. So I think we should start it right now, right here. The Institute.
Right. Okay. Yeah. The Institute for the Future, to steal something from Kim Stanley Robinson.
Indeed. All right, guys. Thank you for listening to General Magic and the Soul of Tech podcast. Tune into our Substack for more interviews and articles at spellboundproductions.substack.com.